Dark clouds had taken over the western sky by the time the yellow school bus reached the intersection of Texas 29 and US 281. This marked the halfway point of their trip. 36 basketball players, 3 coaches, and 3 student trainers were traveling northwest on a 3-hour journey through the hill country to play their final district game, with the hope of a district championship at stake. The Mustangs were leading their tough district with 1 loss, while Coach Tim Kelly's Cougars and the Bulldogs were tied for second with 2 losses each. If the Mustangs won their game that night, the results of the Cougars' Yellow Jackets game would not matter for the playoffs. However, if the Mustangs lost and the Cougars won, they would have to play a game to determine the district winner. If the Yellow Jackets won and the Mustangs lost, there would be a 3-way tie, and they would have to flip a coin to decide the district representative. Both teams understood that the Mustangs losing to a team in 6th place was unlikely, but they were ready to play. They were cautious because Austin weathermen had been predicting the rare occurrence of freezing rain. They even mentioned the possibility of blizzard-like conditions, but everyone laughed it off. That almost never happened. The morning forecast had said that any freezing conditions wouldn't hit the western hill country until after midnight, so they were hurrying to get the game in before the weather turned bad. If the storm came as predicted, it would follow them home without causing trouble for the bus. Still, weather forecasts about a cold front meeting warm, moist air could be tricky. It had been nearly 8 hours since Coach Kelly last heard an update. When he checked at noon, the Bulldogs coach told him that the forecast hadn't changed, so the games were still happening. So, here they were, driving into a winter storm in an old school bus with a weak heater, hoping for the weather to hold long enough for them to play and get home safely, likely well after midnight. Coach Kelly parked the bus next to a large convenience store. He stood up to face the students and reminded them to represent their school and families well while they were inside. He told them that the bad weather coming meant they might not have a chance to eat after the game, so it was a good idea to grab some snacks now. They could eat a burger or something filling at the concession stand after their team played. The 2 assistant coaches went inside with the players to make sure they behaved in the store and to ease the worries of the staff that they might cause trouble. They were confident that the well-mannered kids would not do anything wrong, but it was wise to keep the store staff happy, so they waited by the doors until all the kids were back on the bus. Coach Kelly stood up, stretched, and walked around to get his blood flowing before driving the last 90 minutes to their destination. As he walked near the bus, he looked over the tires and checked for any leaking fluids. It was important to avoid a flat tire or any breakdown during this trip that featured winding roads and steep hills. He turned to look at where they were headed to the northwest, and noticed that the clouds were getting darker and closer in just a few minutes since he last looked. The speed at which the clouds were rolling in made him doubt the weather forecast about when the storm would arrive. He wished he had one of those new mobile phones that someone had invented years ago, but big companies didn't want to take the risk to build the expensive networks needed to make them work everywhere. Tim thought differently and planned to invest in the first company that took a chance, but for now, no one seemed willing to do anything but talk. Maybe he should invite those company leaders to join him on some of these trips so they could see how much they were needed, especially in rural areas. The players, trainers, and coaches were coming out of the store, so he hurried inside to use the restroom. As he left, he stopped to thank the cashiers for their kindness, and they praised him for the good behavior of the team. The store manager said, "It's always a pleasure when your buses stop here, Coach. You can see that the parents have done a great job raising these kids, and you coaches make sure they represent your school well." Tim promised that the team would stop by again on the way home after the games, and he would share their compliments with the kids and their families. Feeling good, Coach Kelly walked out with a smile, only to be met by 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. Feeling the gaze of 39 young people and 2 coaches on the bus, he stopped to greet the officers warmly. The taller officer spoke first. "Coach, we received a call from your transportation director. The cold front is arriving faster and stronger than expected, so the games are postponed. You need to head back immediately and ensure all the kids get home safely. It's not official yet, but reports suggest a strong storm is coming, and it will hit around 10 or 11 p.m. much earlier than expected. You should get moving, Coach." Can we follow you back to the sheriff's office to use the phone for a few calls? It would help us a lot since we want to avoid waiting in the cold for parents," he asked. "We have a phone tree plan, so only one player from each team, freshman, JV, and varsity, needs to call their parents. It would really help us." The deputies agreed, saying it was fine to make as many calls as needed. Just get all the kids home before the strong winds, freezing rain, and snow arrive in a few hours. Once the calls to parents were made, Tim contacted the bus garage to inform the transportation director they were on their way back. He thanked the deputies again for their help. On the way back, the bus was filled with talk as the teenagers managed their disappointment about not playing. They began to imagine the fun they might have if it snowed and started planning their unexpected Friday night without any responsibilities. Even though the phone tree was effective, 2 girls and a boy needed rides to a new neighborhood by Lake Travis since their parents were in Austin and wouldn't be home until later. Since no one else could take them, Tim loaded them into his pickup and made the 40-mile round trip. While driving, he thought about the possible effects of the winter storm, including power outages. There were no natural gas suppliers in his part of the county, so like nearly all homes in the school district, his house had electric heating. He needed to make sure he had plenty of firewood on the covered patio and stacked by the fireplace, just in case. He reminded his passengers to do the same before he dropped them off and headed home. When he pulled into the carport around 8 p.m., he noticed the only lights on were in the living room. This likely meant his 2 young sons were already in bed. He and his lovely wife, Karen, would now have a much-deserved chance to relax and enjoy some quiet time together in front of the fireplace. They typically saved their special time for Saturday after a long week of work as teachers, but this unexpected evening allowed them to get started a little early. After 3.5 months of football practices and basketball games every Friday since football ended, having a whole weekend together felt wonderful, even with the blizzard outside. They truly deserved this time. Karen was a talented kindergarten teacher who always found ways to help each child learn. Tim was the top science teacher in the area, an assistant football coach, and the head basketball coach. Their commitment to their jobs made them respected by their students, parents, and colleagues, but it also meant they had less energy for their marriage during the busy week. Saturdays and Sundays were for family during the day and for each other at night. Sometimes they went out for a date night, but usually they enjoyed family time all day and spent the evenings together at home. After getting home, Tim filled a wheelbarrow with firewood from the pile by the fence and stacked it neatly by the wall under the covered patio. He worked hard, making the pile 6 feet high and 8 feet long. Just to be sure they had enough, he brought in one last load before parking the wheelbarrow near the sliding glass doors. Quietly entering through the laundry room, Tim hung up his coat and tiptoed through the kitchen toward the living room. He wanted to surprise his beloved wife while she was resting on the couch, likely dozing off while watching TV. He hoped she would be dressed in something special under the warm blanket instead of her usual comfy pajamas. However, as he entered the living room, he found their favorite babysitter, Sharon, sitting on the couch. She jumped when she saw him. "Coach, what are you doing here? Don't you have a game today?" Tim was taken aback because he thought Sharon was away at college after graduating early. "Hi, Sharon. The game was called off because of the storm coming. We'll reschedule for Tuesday if necessary." He then asked, "What are you doing back here? Why aren't you at school? And where's Mrs. Kelly?" Sharon looked a bit surprised. "I'm living at home and going to community college this semester. I'm taking some general courses before I start at UT to save money." "Mrs. Kelly went to your game," she added. "I guess you missed her on the road. I hope they are okay. I don't think they knew there was bad weather." Her voice faded as she saw the worry on Tim's face. "Sharon, just to clarify, Karen and some others went to our game tonight. They have been going to all our out-of-town games, and you've been taking care of her kids. Who is they?" With wide eyes and a look of shock, she covered her mouth and said, "Oh, no. They haven't been going to your games? We've been... Oh, no, Coach. You have to believe me. I didn't think about that. I'm so sorry. I should have known better. I feel terrible." "Sharon, you're not terrible, and let's not jump to conclusions. Who is they that she's been going with?" Looking down, she quietly said, "Coach Rogers asked me to babysit. I don't know who asked the other girls. He said it was easier for him since your wife is at the elementary school. The first time I babysat, it was just him and her. I should have been careful and told you. You both always seemed so happy that I didn't suspect anything. I'm sorry, I should have said something. You said the first time. Who else has been involved? I've only babysat 3 times. 2 days after Christmas when your team played in the holiday tournament, and tonight. The first night they went with Coach Rogers. Then they said they were going with Coach Slaughter and his wife. Tonight, I only saw Coach Rogers, but Mrs. Kelly mentioned they picked up Coach Slaughter and his wife on the way. Coach Slaughter even spoke to me at Dairy Queen today. He told me he needed to be there since he's the athletic director, and his wife liked for Mrs. Kelly to go, so I didn't think much of it. She paused and seemed lost in thought. There were other babysitters for the other games, but Coach Rogers asked us not to discuss it among ourselves because your wife didn't want anyone to feel bad about not being chosen. Looking back, we should have been more suspicious. But you did share information among yourselves? Tim asked. Yes. Since I graduated in December, I don't see my friends much, but we still get together every week or two. When we do, we can't help but talk about your little boys. They're so adorable that we love sharing stories about them, Sharon replied. From those talks, you learned that my wife was going to all the out-of-town games with Rogers and the Slaughters? Tim asked for clarification. Yes, Sharon confirmed. Tim studied Sharon, noticing she looked increasingly uncomfortable. He asked, "When did he pick her up tonight?" "He dropped me off at 4 o'clock and they left shortly after," Sharon explained. "Mrs. Kelly had a casserole ready for the oven and asked me to feed the kids at 6. She mentioned that she wouldn't be back until around midnight since the game was quite far away." Tim let out a sigh. "Sharon, can you stay here until one of us comes back? It's possible they didn't know the game was postponed and went ahead anyway, or maybe they learned the news before leaving and stopped at Coach Slaughter's house. They could have also stopped for food. There are too many reasons. I'm going to look for them before the bad weather arrives. If she calls, please don't mention anything about the game being postponed or that you saw me, okay? By the way, what was Coach Rogers driving?" She replied that she was busy until midnight but planned to stay. She also told him they left in Coach Rogers' pickup. "Where will you search? There are so many places. I have no idea where they might be, so I'm going to drive back to the high school to see if Coach Slaughter's car is there. Then I'll drive around to look for it. I'll also try to find out from the transportation director if they got the message about the game being canceled. If they did, I'll check homes, bars, and restaurants instead. Sharon, I promise I'll come back here to help you and the boys. I won't leave you alone during the storm." She smiled at his words, but then frowned. "What will you do if you find them, Coach? Please don't get mad and do something that could cause trouble. You are my favorite person, and I don't want anything bad to happen." Tim reassured her. "Sharon, you didn't cause this. Don't worry, I just want to make sure they are okay. There could be a good reason for all this, and I'll listen to her, but I don't intend to cause harm, just have a talk." She nodded, and he asked her to check on the boys and to get the flashlights and lanterns from the guest bedroom closet in case of a power outage from the storm. As she headed down the hall, he opened the coat closet by the door. He took out a pistol, a shotgun, and a lever-action rifle. He brought the guns to his truck, returned for his bag of ammunition, and put on a heavy coat he had gotten for a hunting trip in Colorado. He built a decent fire in the fireplace, lit the wood, and closed the screen. Pulling a wool cap over his head, he turned to find Sharon standing behind him with a flashlight. He told her, "Maybe you should get in bed, cover up, and rest. We might be up late tonight. That way you will be close to the boys' room in case they wake up and need something. Keep the phone by your side, keep the fire going, and if someone calls, act as if everything is normal. I'll be back soon." She placed her hand on his arm, looked into his big blue eyes, and reminded him to be careful. Then, she walked down the hall to the bedrooms. He grabbed his camera and some film rolls and hurried to the truck. Even with the carport shielding him from the cold wind, it was freezing outside, and the worst of the storm was still far away. Using the soft light from the kitchen window, he put on his belt and prepared his equipment. He made sure everything was ready before stepping into the pickup. When he looked back at the house, Sharon was standing in the open door, her hair blowing in the chilly wind. She appeared worried, and her outfit was not warm enough for the weather ahead. He promised himself he would get her home as soon as he could. The road to the lakeside ranch that John William Rogers had inherited from his grandmother was rough and narrow, so despite his feelings of anger and worry, Tim had to drive carefully. The radio was talking about the winter storm coming, which had already brought heavy rain and snow to the area. The announcer warned that the storm was getting worse, with more freezing rain as cold air mixed with warm air. He advised listeners to prepare for possible power outages, but said that workers would be ready to restore power as quickly as possible. These warnings made Tim more determined to return to Sharon and his sons. He thought carefully about his plan. He couldn't leave them alone all night without light or heat, so he needed to make sure he did things right. He had 4 questions to answer. Who was she with? What were they doing? How long had it been going on? And why? Even if he had to be firm, he would find out the truth. The pickup was warm, but he felt nervous inside. Before reaching the last house on the road to the Rogers Ranch, Tim slowed down and turned off his headlights. He didn't want anyone to notice his truck or suspect that another vehicle had visited the Rogers Ranch house. The house was set back from the road but was brightly lit. From his spot, he could see the TV on in the living room and the heads of the old couple sitting on the couch, their backs turned towards him. About a quarter mile after passing the house, he turned his headlights back on, grateful for the fading, natural light that helped him stay on the narrow road as a storm approached. He switched off his headlights again as he neared the final hill of his journey. Stopping about a quarter mile from the well-lit house, he backed into a pasture road, hidden by brush. The pasture road followed a small stream that crossed the county road. The house was out of sight behind the hill, so no one could see him either. The sky to the northwest had grown completely dark, with flashes of lightning signaling the storm's approach. Though the storm was coming fast, the moonlight above still gave him enough light to see the road ahead. He estimated he had about 40 to 45 minutes before the storm would hit, which could make getting out of there risky. He pulled the belt and scabbard from the console, securing his knife across his left shoulder where he could easily reach it. He slung his rifle over the other shoulder and hung a camera around his neck. Then he took out a small cassette recorder, which he often used for preparing lessons, and tucked it into his hunting jacket's inside pocket. With a flashlight secured in another pocket, he felt weighed down but smiled, thinking back to all the times he had carried similar gear and still managed to drag a deer out of the brush at night. He laughed at himself for complaining now. Holding his shotgun in his right hand, he jogged across the culvert and up the hill toward the ranch house. A single light on an electric pole in the back illuminated 3 pickups and a car parked there. Staying in the shadows along the east side of the house, Tim carefully observed the scene. Seeing no one outside, he moved quietly to the front, where light spilled from the windows. Avoiding the glow from the windows, he discreetly peeked into the living room. Inside, Coach Rogers, Coach Slaughter, and Barry Benton, the school board member known for his loud, brash behavior, stood chatting and drinking, clearly enjoying themselves. Tim, wanting to capture some of the conversation, pulled out his recorder. He knew one of the windows in the old ranch house was often left slightly open, so he set the recorder on the ledge beneath it. The laughter quieted for a moment, and then he overheard Benton make an inappropriate comment, his voice loud and obnoxious as usual. Tim shook his head, aware of the kind of people he was dealing with, but kept his focus on gathering the information he needed. "Thanks for inviting me again, J.W. and Steve," Benton said. "She sure is," Slaughter replied with a grin. "A lovely and energetic woman, and thanks to J.W. and me, she's become the life of the party around here." "Yeah? How'd you two get her interested?" Benton asked, curious. Slaughter leaned back, recalling the story. "It all started last summer at the coaching workshop in Dallas. She was always around, wearing these cute little outfits. She had a way of catching everyone's eye, especially when we saw her relaxing by the pool. I remember telling J.W., we've got to get to know her better. So we came up with a plan. Her husband Tim was supposed to go out with her one night, but I arranged for him and the new coaches to attend the All-Star game instead. That threw a wrench in their plans, and she wasn't too happy when Tim called her to explain. She was already dressed up and waiting at the bar," Slaughter continued. "I apologized when I saw her and explained it was work-related. I tried to make it up to her by buying her a couple of drinks, and we ended up talking in a quieter part of the bar. We were alone, and after a while I got her to dance with me. I kept the conversation going, and before long, we were getting along well. But she wasn't too comfortable with things going further, so she excused herself and left. Slaughter paused, then added, "After that, she avoided me for a bit, but JW came up with an idea when basketball season rolled around. JW, you take it from here." JW chuckled and said, "Well, people say I've got a way with words, you know." "Some do. The rest probably think you're full of it," Benton joked. "Maybe," JW replied, "but I started chatting with her more during the games. I'd drop by her room after school just to talk, and then I'd give her a call when she got home. Little by little, we became friends, and that's how things got rolling." The conversation continued, and the three of them shared stories and laughed, reminiscing about the events that brought them together. In the beginning, it all seemed innocent. I was charming, offering compliments and teasing remarks about how her husband was off and away, leaving her to juggle the responsibilities of raising the kids, managing the house, and working full-time. It was the usual back and forth of flirtation. Over time, the flirting increased, and by early December, we were frequently talking late into the night. Our conversations became more personal, discussing everything from how her day went to light-hearted jokes. It was clear that we were growing closer, and I could sense a shift in our dynamic. Later that month, when her husband was occupied with work, we decided to meet up. I suggested we go out for a drink to relax and unwind, and after some hesitation, she agreed. We both knew that going out in public might draw attention, so I recommended a quieter spot to avoid any gossip. Once we were alone, the atmosphere became more intimate. We continued talking, and as the evening went on, our connection deepened. There was a natural closeness between us, and eventually, that led to sharing a kiss. At first, she was hesitant, but soon we were caught up in the moment, exchanging kisses with growing intensity. As the night continued, our feelings became more apparent. The bond we had been building over weeks came to the surface, and we spent time together, lost in the connection we had created. It was a night of shared emotions and mutual understanding, but in the end, it was clear that things had moved too fast. After a while, she got up, said it was time for her to go home, and we parted ways. I called her the next day, but she didn't pick up. I knew the team had a game that night, so I arranged for a babysitter and told her to get ready because we were going to the game in Taylor with Coach Slaughter, his wife, and some of the other parents. She seemed doubtful at first, but when I mentioned the parents, her mood lifted. 15 minutes later, she came back wearing her favorite blue dress and white boots ready for the game. However, instead of heading toward Taylor, I turned toward my place. She got upset. I handed her a drink in a large cup and let her vent. Then, I calmly told her that I had recorded what happened the day before, and if she didn't go along with tonight's plans, I would send the footage to her husband. She cried, but I reminded her how much fun she had yesterday and promised tonight would be just as enjoyable. I also mentioned a special gift I had for her. After a while, she drank the entire cup, stopped crying, and cursed at me for a good 10 minutes. Despite her anger, she eventually stepped out of the car and followed me inside the house. We shared a kiss, and though she resisted at first, we spent the evening together. Coach Slaughter, who had been watching from the kitchen, joined us after a while. She initially struggled, but over time she gave in and relaxed. We all spent the evening together, though she insisted it wouldn't happen again. The next day, we told her we'd come by again after the bus left for the tournament. She said no, but when we arrived, she was already dressed, waiting for us. JW drove while we sat in the truck, quietly exchanging stories. The conversation shifted to a memorable day at the ranch. JW corrected Steve, laughing a little. He forgot to mention that she was all dressed up when we left her place. Before we even got far from town, she had already let loose, not caring much about anything around us. We did get a few honks from passing cars, but she didn't mind. We were all just having a good time, caught up in the moment. There was a pause before JW continued. It was one of those wild days where everything felt out of control, but no one seemed to care. It was just intense. That day was also when Frank Hughes, her principal, got involved. When we arrived at the house, things escalated quickly. It was a chaotic scene, full of emotions and intensity. She felt torn between what was happening and the pressure of her job. Frank made some heavy-handed comments about her work and upcoming evaluations, trying to use his authority to influence her decisions. Afterward, she admitted to us that she'd been feeling overwhelmed. The stress from work, home, and the expectations put on her were too much. She ended up trying to bury her feelings by working harder and trying to meet everyone's demands, but it was clear she was struggling. Frank, trying to sound like he was in control, hinted at more demands. He mentioned expecting her to stay late at work for meetings, but it was obvious there was more behind his words. He was manipulating her, using his position to get what he wanted. Benton, curious, asked, "What do you think will happen if her husband finds out?" Steve, never one to miss a chance for a joke, replied, "Maybe he'll get upset and leave. Then we can take her in full time." He chuckled, but JW was quick to add, "We're not trying to let him find out. Word is he's not someone to mess with. People say he's got a rough side, and you don't want to be on the wrong end of it." Benton, ever confident, added with a smirk, "If he causes trouble, I've got ways to deal with him. No need to worry about that." With the tension thick in the air, the conversation ended, leaving everyone wondering what might happen next. Tim struggled to keep his emotions in check as he leaned against the building, working hard to calm himself enough to proceed with his plan. The wind picked up, and he felt a few drops of rain hit him. He retrieved his recorder and quietly made his way around the house to the bedroom Frank had come from. The windows were slightly open, and the curtains and blinds were drawn back, giving him a clear view and allowing him to hear everything inside. Even though Tim knew what he was going to witness, seeing it still shook him deeply. He couldn't believe that the woman he had once cherished, his wife and the mother of his children, could be involved in such a betrayal. His stomach churned, but he steadied himself and began taking pictures, his mind set on gathering evidence for what needed to be done. In the bedroom, two men stood beside the bed where his wife was with another man. The younger man was unfamiliar to Tim, and one of the men in the room was filming the scene. When the younger man finished and stepped away, Tim recognized him as Larry Barnes, someone Tim knew through work. Larry made a rude comment about how Tim couldn't satisfy his wife, mocking him openly. Karen, who had been involved in the situation, stopped the next man from approaching her and playfully asked Larry to come back to her. Larry, clearly amused, laughed and made light of the situation but didn't return to her side. Tim's heart was heavy as he continued to document what he saw, knowing that his life had changed forever. After dealing with the situation, Karen said, "If we were married, you wouldn't be able to meet my needs either, would you? You are my 5th partner tonight, and you didn't come close to satisfying me. I've been with you, just like I did with the others, and then I will keep going if you can keep up." She continued, "Larry, you may think highly of yourself, but let me remind you, you have not measured up. You can't compare to Tim, who lasts much longer and knows how to really please me. If I gave Tim another chance, he would be right back here within minutes." With a firm voice, Karen said, "If you ever speak poorly of Tim again, I won't hold back." With tears in her eyes but strength in her voice, she added, "It's not Tim's fault if I have high desires, but he knows how to take care of me better than you do." Larry responded with an insult, and she simply said, "Exactly," as he left the room looking defeated. Feeling the tension lift, Karen got off the bed and moved to the restroom, then into the living room. Tim returned to the window just in time to hear Karen say firmly, "I'm done. I need to go home now." Her friends were not happy to hear this. Steve, JW, Frank, and Benton took turns trying to change her mind, promising to keep Larry away if she stayed a little longer. JW came over and put his arm around her. "We promised we would send you home happy, not upset. Just have a drink with us for a bit, then we can figure out what to do next. There's no hurry. We all care about you, and we want to make sure you have a good time. Plus, if we manage to film this 5-person scene tonight, we can take a break for a while after that." JW told Larry, "You need to apologize to Karen for what you said earlier, then grab your things and head home. We wouldn't want your wife worrying about where you are, would we?" Tim was almost finished with the second roll of film, but with everyone trying to convince Karen to stay, he quickly decided to slip into the bedroom and grab the videotapes from the cameras they used. When Tim entered the bedroom, he quickly removed a tape from the tripod near the foot of the bed and replaced it with one from a stack of blank tapes sitting on a chair. He did the same with the camera that had been left on the bed. As he was about to leave, he noticed more tapes on the bookshelf by the door. He grabbed the pillow that had been on the bed, removed the case, and stuffed the pillow under the bed. Looking over the tapes, he chose the ones labeled KK and added another marked Highlights. Then, without paying much attention, he grabbed several other tapes and stuffed them all into the pillowcase until it was full enough for him to tie and carry. Stepping back outside, the cold wind hit him hard, now mixed with freezing rain and sleet. Tim realized he didn't have much time. He hurried back toward his truck, carrying a shotgun in one hand, the pillowcase in the other, and a rifle slung over his shoulder. When he reached Larry's car, something about seeing it sparked a sudden rush of anger in him. Pulling out a knife, he slashed the tires and muttered to himself about how Larry deserved it. His rage not fully satisfied, he went from one vehicle to the next, puncturing all their tires. He even scratched the paint on Larry's car with his knife, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. Tim's anger had now shifted to destruction. He thought about the threats they had made against him and his family. They had said they would kill him if he ever found out, and now he had. It felt like the choice had been made for him. As the wind picked up and the storm made visibility worse, a new idea crossed his mind: cutting off their power. He considered shooting the transformer, but then remembered there was a backup generator in the pump house. He rushed over, grabbed an axe from the shed, and smashed the generator until it was beyond repair, gasoline spilling onto the floor. Laughing to himself, Tim felt a wild energy rise within him, something he hadn't felt in years. He looked around, thinking about what to do next. Tim felt a surge of anger as he looked around, seeing mostly useless things. In a fit of frustration, he swung the axe at the electric box for the pump. It didn't really help anything, but it let him release some of his pent-up rage. With the axe still in hand, he stepped outside and followed the telephone line back to the house, cutting it. Without a phone, they wouldn't be able to call for help when they realized their vehicles had no tires. And once he took out the transformer, they would find themselves in deep trouble. He started to think about revenge. The big question was whether he could actually go through with it, knowing it could hurt the people he once cared about, including the mother of his children. Standing in the blizzard, he looked at the brightly lit house. Inside was the woman he had loved for 6 years, and he couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and anger. The house contained several men who were around her now, men he knew well. Even though Larry had tried to get rid of him, no one came outside. Tim decided to take one last look for himself. He caught sight of Karen in the bedroom, and the sight filled him with rage and hurt. His heart raced as he realized the reality of what was happening, and he felt his love for her fade away. With a heavy heart, Tim thought to himself that maybe it was better for his sons to grow up without her negative influence. He took some pictures with the last of his film, capturing moments that he never wanted to remember. The scene was chaotic, and he turned away from it, trying to gulp down the anger as he walked back to the pole. Against the fierce wind and with the sky cracking with lightning, Tim stepped back a few paces and aimed his shotgun at the transformer line. He waited for a flash of lightning and fired just as thunder rumbled, hoping to blend the noise with the blast. In an instant, sparks flew, and chaos erupted as the line seemed to burst. The lights in the house went dark as he hurried away from the dangers of the snapping wire. Feeling satisfied, he ran toward his truck. Once he reached the edge of the brush, Tim paused and glanced back at the house through the swirling snow. He saw a flashlight shining and noticed a man come out the back door, yelling to the others, "Wow, the blizzard is here! Oh no, the power line is down, sparking near our trucks! Get dressed! We need to leave now!" His loud laughter was lost in the storm as he turned back to his truck. The rain and sleet had changed into a heavy snowstorm, making it hard to see. He walked about 100 yards when he heard a loud noise and the sky lit up. Looking back, he saw a fire burning somewhere behind the house, likely in the pump house or one of their trucks. He chuckled and kept going. The bushes on each side of the road helped guide him through the gully to the pasture road, where he finally saw his truck through the snow. It was covered in ice, and even with the strong wind, snow stuck to the ice. Tim started the truck and turned the heater on high. He reached under the back seat, pulled out a can of dicer and a scraper, sprayed the windshield, windows, and mirrors, and scraped them clear. He got back in, engaged the four-wheel drive, and headed back toward town. Confident that no one could see his lights in the blizzard, which limited visibility to just a few feet, he turned on his low beams and fog lights and made his way home. He couldn't see the ranch house and hoped the elderly couple there wouldn't spot his lights. Suddenly, the dark sky behind it lit up and then faded. One of their trucks was gone. He laughed again and focused back on the road. It was slow going, but he made it off the dirt road and onto the pavement leading to town. There was no traffic, but he had to drive cautiously because he could barely see a few feet in front of the truck. The headlights shone brightly but quickly disappeared into the falling snow. As he drove, he thought about the unusual group that his wife was involved with. If he found her with someone handsome, he might have understood, but not this group of unappealing, out-of-shape men. What was going on? J.W., the first man involved, was shorter and heavier than Tim, with an average build. He may have been nice-looking years ago, but he now looked older than his age. Steve was about 5'8", tall, and looked quite heavy. He might have had some advantages, but his size was a clear issue. Frank was 6'2", but very thin, with noticeable features and an odd hairstyle. Frank was also older, and Benton was shorter and heavier with a lot of features that didn't help his appearance. He worked as a lawyer, but most of his money came from his family. His current wife was his third, and after losing a lot to his first 2 divorces, he knew he couldn't afford another if this one didn't go well. They had a contract to protect his assets, but he made it very strict if she was unfaithful. She agreed, but wanted the same level of protection for herself. He thought the arrangement would keep her in line while he continued to have fun. However, if the pictures of that wild party got back to her, it would be a disaster for him. John Allen was your average insurance agent. He looked all right in a suit, but without clothes, he didn't impress anyone. He was a bit overweight with skinny arms and legs. His boss, Joe Ward, was even heavier and always wore suspenders to keep his pants from falling down. He often claimed this would be his last job before retiring, but he also liked to brag about his prowess in various areas, so it was hard to tell what was true. Larry was the most attractive among them and was in great shape. He was around Tim's age, while the others were in their 50s and 60s. He wondered why his beautiful wife, who could have anyone, was with these guys. Then it clicked. She was involved with these men for a while, and it started after Christmas. There were mixed reasons, like her curiosity and the influence of people who took advantage of her. Tim felt certain there was no way back for her now. The fact that she was able to keep her activities a secret for 2 months made it clear she couldn't be trusted. This raised doubts about whether she really loved him at all. Among the men, there were coaches, school leaders, and even someone married to his ex-favorite. This new betrayal by them and how they treated his family meant they would face consequences. As he drove home, the streetlights were still on, but he knew it wouldn't last. The strong winds were crashing into trees, and soon the power would likely cut out. Tim hung his insulated pants and parka in the laundry room. He then hid the tape recorder, videos, used film, and camera in the attic, behind some empty moving boxes. It was a close call, but he had kept his promise to be back to take care of his sons and their babysitter before the storm got too strong. The storm had definitely arrived, but he could still wake the boys and take their 18-year-old babysitter Sharon home to her parents. Sharon heard him come in from the laundry room and met him in the kitchen with a worried expression. She hugged him tightly and asked if he was okay. She insisted he take a hot bath and put on warm clothes before he got sick. Tim found it interesting how women seemed to know just how to care for others. "Sharon, it's really bad outside. Won't your parents worry if you don't come home?" he asked. "No, Coach. I called them when the storm started. I told them I would stay here because it was too dangerous for you to drive me home. They said it was all right. We should build a big fire and stay warm until the storm passes, since the power might go out soon." Tim smiled and lifted her chin to look her in the eyes. "You are very smart, Sharon. I can't thank you enough for all you've done for me and the boys tonight." "You can thank me by getting out of those wet clothes and getting everything ready before the lights and heat go off," she replied. Tim noticed that Sharon had already started a fire. He could feel the warmth from across the room. She had also gathered his kerosene lanterns and flashlights, setting them on the coffee table nearby. He took a hot shower while he still could and dressed in warm sweats. He moved the mattress from the guest room to the living room near the fire and created a cozy spot on the carpet beside it for his sons using sleeping bags, comforters, and blankets. If the electricity went out, the house would become too cold to stay in bed, so they all needed to gather by the fire. "Sharon, come with me. We need to get you in some warm clothes. Karen has some cozy sweats in her closet. Take a hot shower and then put on some fleece sweats and wool socks. You might want to layer up to stay warm. I'm going to move the sleeping boys onto their spot and cover them with blankets. Please bring some blankets from the king bed in my room when you come back, so we have enough for the mattress, too." Just as Sharon entered the living room with the last of the blankets, the electricity went out. Tim added more logs to the fire, lit a lantern, and he and Sharon sat on the mattress facing the fireplace, with the lantern flickering behind them. She nestled close to him, wrapped a blanket around them, and said, "I like this. The flickering lights create a nice mood, and being held by you makes me feel warm inside." He knew he shouldn't be holding her that way, but he was feeling angry and hurt. She needed comfort. He handed her a large glass of water from the coffee table and told her to drink it all. "I filled up our pitchers in 2 big containers so we have enough water. The city gets its water from the lake, and if the storm gets worse, we might have problems," Tim said. "We need to stay hydrated, especially now. We have enough to drink and even some extra to flush the toilet if we're careful." Sharon drank her water but stayed quiet. He could feel her looking at him. He turned to her and said, "Coach, did you find them?" He held her gaze and replied, "I searched everywhere reasonable. I even drove to the club she likes, but found nothing. I have no idea where they are, but we both know Karen has been sneaking away for 2 months, lying about it. So, let's leave it at that, okay?" What he really thought when she asked was very different. "I saw my wife with 7 other men and took pictures of them together. What did I do next? Something I might regret, but not what I truly wanted, which was to confront them all on the spot." Sharon moved closer and leaned in. "Coach, I turned 19 at midnight. This will be the most exciting birthday I've ever had, or probably will ever have. I'm not scared because you're here, but I might get a little emotional tonight. It's been a rough experience for me. I'm so let down by Mrs. Kelly." He sighed and changed the subject. "We both need some sleep. If you wake up and the fire is low, wake me up and I'll get more logs. I don't want you to go because the wind is strong and the door might not stay closed, making the house colder." Suddenly, Sharon jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, ran to the bedrooms, and returned with pillows for both of them. They exchanged goodnight wishes, slipped under the covers, and tried to fall asleep. Tim knew he should sleep but wasn't sure if he would. He was surprised when he woke up 3 hours later with Sharon sleeping against him and the fire burning low. He gently pulled away from her, put on a long coat and rain boots, and stepped outside to gather wood. The storm seemed to have gotten worse. The lightning and thunder were gone, but the wind was howling, blowing the snow sideways. The air was icy cold, and Tim quickly shut the sliding glass door to keep the snow from blowing inside as he gathered the wood he had prepared earlier. Tim managed to bring the wagon full of wood indoors without too much trouble. He parked it beside the fireplace and got the fire going again. Once it was burning brightly, he checked on his sons, who were cozy and fast asleep. Satisfied, he quietly slipped under the blankets, trying not to disturb Sharon. She didn't wake up but shifted closer to him, making herself comfortable. Sharon rested her head on his shoulder, draping her arm over his chest and tangling her leg with his. She was sound asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Despite everything he had been through that night, he felt comfort in her closeness. He focused on calming his thoughts and drifted off to sleep. The next thing Tim remembered was waking to the warmth of Sharon's soft kisses on his lips. Still half asleep, he returned her affection. They shared a tender moment, holding each other close, and soon Tim was lost in the comfort of being with his wife. They spent the quiet early morning hours wrapped in each other's embrace, finding solace in their closeness after a long and exhausting day. Eventually, they both fell back into a peaceful sleep, the warmth of the fire filling the room. Tim felt a rush of confusion as the realization hit him. He wasn't with his wife. This was Sharon, the babysitter, and everything suddenly felt wrong. Sharon had just expressed her gratitude, telling him how much she had enjoyed the moment, but his mind was spiraling. She nestled beside him, her body resting against his, still basking in the aftermath of their shared connection. "Tim, this is the best birthday present I've ever gotten," she said softly, kissing him once more. but he could barely focus on her words. His thoughts were clouded with guilt. Sharon's gentle touches and kind words were filled with innocence, but Tim's conscience was fighting hard to regain control. He struggled to maintain his composure, scolding himself internally. This isn't right. She's young. She trusts you. He couldn't allow things to go any further, no matter how much his emotions were tangled. He gently pulled his hand away as Sharon's expression changed, her eyes searching his face for signs of hesitation. He knew she was looking for reassurance, and although she didn't find guilt there, Tim knew they needed to stop. "Sharon, we should stop," he said softly, trying to break the moment as gently as possible. Sharon nodded, though she seemed a little confused. After a moment, she gave him one last soft kiss before moving to the side and getting dressed again, pulling her comfortable clothes back on. Tim sat in silence for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. He knew that stopping was the right thing to do, but the weight of his choices pressed heavily on his mind. Without saying anything else, he stood up, telling her he needed to get more wood for the fire before anyone else woke up. From all the times he had seen her in short shorts and her dance team uniform, he knew her legs were among the best he had ever seen. But now that he had seen everything else, he realized her beauty from head to toe was truly special. Feeling a rush of thoughts overwhelming him, he shook his head and turned his attention back to his chores. He pulled his shirt down, found his sweatpants, put on his rubber boots, buttoned his overcoat, and walked to the sliding glass door where the firewood was kept. Tim opened the heavy curtains and was amazed to see that his yard, the outbuildings, the trees, and everything else was covered in snow. Seeing such a winter scene in central Texas felt unreal. Wanting to share the view, he signaled to Sharon, who cuddled under his arm and admired the beauty with him. He kissed her on the head, released her, and dashed outside to gather more wood. Once the fire was going again, he walked down the chilly hall to the even colder bedroom to grab his battery-powered radio. The early news was all about the weather, the ice and snow, the fallen power lines and outages, the dangerous driving conditions, and the many closed roads. He listened until he got too cold, then turned it off and returned to the living room. As expected, the boys were up and hungry. Sharon had poured their favorite cereal into bowls, and they were eating at the coffee table while chatting excitedly with her. She looked so sweet talking with the boys, but the way she looked at him when he returned was a clear reminder that she was all grown up. He took a seat beside her, trying to push his thoughts away. Mark and Patrick were so excited they could barely speak. Tim explained that it was kind of like camping, but at home. They cheered and laughed, but then little Mark looked around and asked, "Where is Mommy? She likes to camp with us, and I miss her." "Mark, sweetheart, she stayed with friends last night because the storm made it too dangerous to drive. Maybe she can come home today, but I'm sure she will be here by tomorrow. Sharon is staying because she can't go home either, and you boys can bring all your toys in here to play all day." Both boys protested loudly. It was their first snowfall at home, and they wanted to do all the fun things they had seen on TV. Tim put them off for an hour, but they were persistent, so he bundled them up. Sharon put on one of Karen's ski bibs and boots, and Tim hurriedly pulled on a heavy jumpsuit he wore for hunting. He grabbed the Polaroid camera and took everyone outside. The fun lasted only until the 25-degree weather made building a snowman and throwing snowballs less enjoyable. They quickly hustled back inside. The boys took off their wet gloves and clothes and warmed their little hands and bodies by the fire while Tim and Sharon changed. After their chilly adventure, the boys were happy to play with their toys on the carpet next to the fire. By 10 o'clock, the strong winds had calmed down and a bit of sunshine peeked through the clouds. Tim knew the sun would start melting the snow. He figured that Karen's friends would soon bring her home once they could fix their cars or get a ride. He turned on the little radio again and listened to various reports. A few caught his attention. It was snowing less south of Austin, but it was worse to the north and west. San Marcos and towns to the south were back to normal, while places like Williamson, Bell, and Lampasas counties still had no power, and many roads were closed. The hill country had more trouble, with over 6 inches of snow sitting on top of a slippery layer of ice from freezing rain. The high school where he worked had some damage to its roof. but the police had trouble finding the superintendent for instructions. They asked people who knew where he was to contact the sheriff's office as soon as possible. Tim smiled and quietly hoped that the roof had fallen in on the superintendent and his group. He didn't include Karen in that wish because he didn't want to upset his sons. Her behavior had made his heart hard. Tim thought about what to do next and decided he needed advice from his lawyer who lived nearby. His gut told him to stay home and face Karen and the friends who brought her back, but his mind said he should talk to his lawyer first to avoid making mistakes. In the end, his mind won. "Sharon, boys, I'm going to get dressed, get in the truck, see if the roads are open, and check on the electricity situation. If it's going to be off for a while, we may need to go somewhere that still has power until it comes back on. I'll go alone because I'm not sure how safe the roads are, but I'll be back in 2 hours or less." Sharon looked worried, but he smiled at her, winked, and asked her to keep the boys busy so they would be ready for a nap when he got back. She winked back, her face brightening, and said she would make sure they were really tired, adding that she wanted to enjoy the rest of her birthday surprise when he returned. Tim started the truck and returned to the laundry room. He gathered some important things: his camera, a bag of videotapes, and a tape recorder. Then he went back inside to say goodbye and drove carefully out of their cul-de-sac. The roads were better than Tim expected, and with his four-wheel drive truck and all-weather tires, he reached his lawyer's house without much trouble. Andy Robbins was only a bit older than Tim. He had gone through a tough divorce a year ago when he found out that his wife was involved with her boss. He discovered this when he returned home to grab some papers and caught them together in his room when they were supposed to be at work. Andy was understandably upset and confronted the man. He got into trouble for it and ended up in jail. When he got out, he found that his wife had emptied their bank accounts and left with their daughter. During the divorce, Andy managed to secure primary custody of his child and a ruling to get his money back. However, his wife and daughter were still missing. He got her boss fired, but then the man vanished too, and people suspected that he was with Andy's wife somewhere, using Andy's money. Because of all this, Andy worked long hours and spent his free time feeling angry and upset. When Tim showed up unexpectedly at Andy's door on a snowy Saturday, Andy was surprised. He listened as Tim shared his own sad story. After Tim calmed down, they talked about what to do next. Andy looked through his law books for similar cases, and they made a plan. Tim wanted to end things with his unfaithful wife, gain full custody of his sons, and avoid losing all his money in the divorce. Andy also had some goals involving 2 coaches and other school officials, but those could wait. Right now, their focus was on Tim's situation. Being an early buyer of a laptop, which had cost him a lot of money, Andy promised to have Tim's papers ready by Monday, if everything worked well. Thinking Tim might have been seen today, Andy suggested he report his wife missing to the police. When Tim arrived at the local police station, he found most officers gathered there. They were surprised to see him and listened closely when he explained why he was there. Some officers looked curious as they wondered about the reasons behind Tim's wife disappearing during the snowstorm. The police chief mentioned that many people were reported missing, likely because with phone service down, anyone away from home during the worst of the storm couldn't call to check in. They reported that the rescue teams had found several people who had sought shelter when the snowstorm started. The sergeant reminded Tim that his wife was young, healthy, and smart, so he felt sure she would be all right. They promised to add her to the list right away, and the police and emergency workers would be looking for her. The chief asked for a recent picture of Karen. Tim searched through his wallet, chuckled, and said, "I hope this doesn't get shared." He handed over the only photo he had, a picture of his wife outside by the Barton Springs pool. Everyone looked at it closely. As Tim was putting it back in his wallet, one young officer quietly commented that he understood why Tim wanted her found quickly. Tim and the others shared a laugh, and the sergeant asked for more details that could help. Tim remembered coming home early after the basketball games were called off. He found his young sons with the babysitter who had no idea where his wife had gone. He mentioned that he searched for her, but when the storm hit, he returned home to take care of his kids and the babysitter. He was going to drive the babysitter home, but her parents asked them to stay put due to the bad weather. Tim explained that he had made a big fire and set up sleeping areas, and they all spent the night by the fireplace. The babysitter was with his sons now, but he wanted to go back to take her home since the roads were getting better in his four-wheel drive. The officers reassured him they would keep an eye out for Karen and wished him luck with his two energetic boys. Before heading home, he drove out to the county lane toward JW's ranch and saw that the snow-covered road was untouched. He smiled and returned home. Sharon greeted him with a smile and a shh, pointing at the sleeping boys. After he took off his coat and hung it up, she hugged him tight and said she was ready for her surprise now. Tim gave her a gentle kiss and explained that his lawyer had advised him to take her home quickly to avoid problems with his upcoming divorce. She looked disappointed, but after he explained further, she said she understood, but wanted a rain check. With a smile, Tim assured her that she would get her surprise at the right time. They talked about what to do if Karen showed up at her parents' house, with or without anyone else. He shared his plans for the weekend and Monday. She promised she would never tell anyone about what they had done or his plans, no matter what. He smiled and hugged her again. She moved close to him, and he gently pulled back enough to ask, "Sharon, can we please wait until things are more settled? It's not that I don't want you." She smiled and agreed, but playfully squeezed his side and said, "You are a good man, Tim, but I can see how much you're interested in me." She gave him a playful look and warned, "Remember, you're the one I want to be close to, but now that you've shown me how nice being together can be, I might not be able to wait too long." He playfully tapped her on the back and shook his head in mock disapproval, then went to pack his son's things. When he returned to the warm living room, the boys were awake, finishing a snack with Sharon. They loaded the truck and started toward her house. The ride over the snowy roads was calm, and her parents were delighted to see her. They assured Tim that they had a fireplace, plenty of firewood, food, and water, so they would be okay. Her family started heading back to the house, bundling up against the cold wind. Sharon opened the back door, kissed the boys goodbye, and told Tim, "I'd like to help you in any way I can, Coach. Just let me know what I can do." Tim turned to her and said, "Actually, I have something for you to do." Sharon smiled. "Consider it done," and walked toward the house in a way that definitely caught his eye. He grinned and honked as he pulled away, wondering if there could be a future for a connection between a 19-year-old and a 26-year-old. Probably not, he thought. But she was quite charming from head to toe, and he admired her youth and energy. Perhaps a close friendship between a recently divorced man and a college student could work, especially when summer came. Tim stopped by the police station to inform them he was taking his sons to stay with relatives in the South until the power was restored. The officer on duty, Jimmy, was a former neighbor who had moved to a bigger neighborhood closer to his wife's job. Jimmy asked for a way to contact him if his wife was found, raising an eyebrow when Tim gave him Andy's number. "Since there are no phones yet, I don't know where we will stay, but Andy will know where I am and how to reach me. He's a neighbor and my lawyer, but let's just keep it as neighbor and friend for now." Jimmy noticed Tim's bare ring finger and held up his own. "I understand, brother, I understand. When I saw her name, I was curious why she wasn't with her family. Any idea where she might be?" "Not really. I came home about 7 hours early because our basketball game was postponed. The babysitter was there, and she told me Karen was picked up at 4:30 by a man in a pickup truck, but she didn't say where they were going or who he was with. Please let Andy know as soon as you find her, no matter what. I'm not sure I want the boys around if things get tough, or if I discover she was out doing something not right." Jimmy patted him on the shoulder and wished him a good journey, reminding him that there would likely be other drivers on the road who might struggle in the snow, so he needed to be careful. The main road to Austin was blanketed in fresh snow. The traffic lights were out, and several cars were stuck in the ditches, but his 4X4 with all-weather tires handled the conditions well. However, he was running low on gas, so he stopped at a gas station just south of Austin. He bought a newspaper and flipped to the sports section. He saw the headline, "Mustangs Win District Title." The first and sixth place teams had played their game the afternoon before to avoid the storm, and the first place team won. This meant that they wouldn't reschedule the postponed game since it wouldn't affect the playoffs anymore. Tim felt both sad and relieved. Sad that his team was out of the running, but relieved that he was done with coaching for the year. Now he could focus on the difficult things ahead. As he expected, by the time they reached San Marcos, there was only a little snow, and when they got to New Braunfels, there was none at all. Tim drove straight to his friend's house, left the sleeping boys in the back seat, and knocked on the door. Will, known as Wild Willie to his friends, pulled him into a big hug and tried to bring him inside. Tim explained that his boys were in the truck, so Will helped him carry them into the house. His wife, Laura, told them to put the boys on one of the beds in the guest room, then they all went to the kitchen to talk. After discussing the winter storm, Will asked why Karen wasn't with him. Tim explained that he came home early because the basketball game was canceled, only to find their babysitter at his house. The babysitter mentioned that she was there so Karen could go to the game with his boss and another coach, as usual. The only issue, Tim told them, was that his wife and the coaches hadn't attended an away game all season, and they weren't going to this one either. Laura looked worried and came around the table to embrace him. Tim explained that he was looking for a place to stay until tomorrow or Monday, and why. They insisted that he would stay with them, and Laura would help care for the kids. It would be good practice for when their first baby arrived in 7 months. He looked at her closely and jokingly said, "Wow, you don't look pregnant at all. Are you sure? You seem to have a nice glow, and while you look great, your waist is still slim." "You're kidding, right?" Laura smiled, waved her hand, and said, "You're flattering me." Will felt proud. Tim gave them warm congratulations with big hugs and kisses on the cheek. They talked about becoming parents for a little while before Tim went to check on his kids. When Tim returned to the table, he asked Will, "Does your friend still have the camera shop downtown? Is he open today, and does he still develop photos?" Will nodded and replied, "Yes, he has the shop, develops photos, and he's open all day today. Do you want me to take you there?" Laura offered to watch his children, and Tim drove Will downtown. "Even if he wasn't open, he'd probably be there. He lives above his shop now," Will explained as they drove. "He and his wife got divorced about 6 months ago. Even though he didn't do right, she got the kids and the house. He sees them every other weekend and for a month in summer. Life can be tough, and divorce laws can be unfair." Tim said carefully, "Will, there's more to this than I'm saying, but I need your promise that you won't tell anyone, even a jury, that I shared this." Will raised his hand and promised he wouldn't as he drove on. "I found some things," Will said flatly. "I have 2 rolls of film and some videos. I think they belong to Karen and maybe some other girls, but I haven't watched any of them. I want to make copies and store them safely in case I need them later for my divorce and custody. I'm sorry to involve you and Carl, but I really need your help." "Brothers for life," Wildman said with a big smile. "You know we're here for you." When they arrived, Carl waved and finished helping a customer before coming over to greet them. Tim explained he needed 2 rolls of film developed quickly, and Carl agreed to help while they waited. He asked his assistant to manage the front of the store and took Tim and Will to the back to prepare the film. Tim also asked Carl if he could copy VHS tapes. Carl pointed to 3 VCR players and said they could do high-speed copying. Tim then brought in a bag full of tapes and asked how long it would take and how much it would cost to copy them all. After counting, Carl gave him a fair price and said he could work on it today and tonight. As he set up the machines with blank tapes, he said, "Let's get started. Give me the first 3 tapes you want copied. How many copies do you want?" Tim replied that he wanted 2 copies of those 3 tapes and 1 of the others. Carl started copying the tapes. While they were still in Carl's office chatting, Laura called to remind Will that they had promised to go out with 3 other couples that night and wanted Tim and Carl to join them. The boys were going to stay with 3 kids and 2 babysitters at Harry's house, so they couldn't back out. The beer garden had a lively atmosphere with lots of German beer and friendly people, which made everyone more relaxed. They were the only group sitting outside on the cool night, gathered around several tables pushed together. A jukebox played sad songs, mostly old country, but also included tracks from Elvis, Ricky Nelson, and Johnny Mathis. When Betty, Harry's wife, asked where Karen was, Tim, who had enjoyed a few drinks, spoke up. He mentioned coming home early to find the babysitter instead of his wife, who hadn't come home or contacted him. He thought she might be out with other men since he had taken the boys and left before she returned. He said they knew there was a lot of snow in the Austin area but didn't know how severe it was. Tim didn't offer much more insight. Will was already aware of Karen's actions, but the other men were shocked. John exclaimed, "I can't believe she would do that!" And Harry said, I never would have believed Karen could do something like that. Are you sure? Tim shrugged. I can't say for certain, but what else could it be? Tim noticed the four women exchanging looks after Harry spoke up and challenged them. What, you ladies aren't surprised? The women glanced at one another again, and Betty said, No, I guess not. Men often miss the signs, but we understand each other well enough. The last time we were all together, she was flirting a lot when you weren't around. So what? Harry replied. You all flirt too. Does that mean you are seeing other men? There are limits to my flirting, and part of it is to remind you how lucky you are to have me, Betty said. But remember when you had to look for me at a dance because I hadn't come back for a while? You remember how she said she was feeling sick, but then went back to having fun? Betty's comments caught Harry off guard, and he stumbled in his response. Okay, but you know those two are often not truthful. We didn't believe a word because Will, John, and I were outside and nothing really happened then. Laura spoke up, looking at her husband. Harry, John, Corky, Will, has Karen ever made you uncomfortable on the dance floor or anywhere else? Has she ever flirted with you? Maybe kissed you? Laura asked, her voice curious but serious. Will turned red, stammering. She was drunk. It didn't mean anything. Are you sure? Laura pressed. And are Vic and Louis lying, or are you all telling the truth when you claim nothing really happened? You sound as uncertain now as when I first asked you. The women turned to Tim, and Laura continued. We're sorry, Tim. We would have told you if we had solid proof, but we've had our suspicions. We know she loves you a lot, but something's been different since after Mark was born. She used to be all about you, always talking about how much she loved being with you. She would share way too many details with us, but there was no question that her life was all about you. Lately, though, after a couple of drinks, it seems like she's looking for something else. Maybe, given what you think you've learned, she has started finding enjoyment with others, too. Tim looked thoughtful, but then chuckled. It's not that I doubt my wife could handle these guys if she wanted to, or that they wouldn't try if given the chance. But really, 5 men in 20 minutes? That's hard to believe. Betty laughed sarcastically. Well, it wouldn't be the first time. The other wives chuckled, too. Tim pointed playfully at the 3 men, then let his hand fall limp, making everyone laugh. The 3 men, however, looked embarrassed and guilty. Tim was still processing Will's shaky denial and everything the women had said when Carl walked up and introduced his cousin and her friend. The mood shifted quickly. Carl's cousin from Tennessee and her friend from Georgia, both students at Trinity University in San Antonio, had surprised him by showing up at closing time, insisting he take them out for the night. He brought them to the beer garden where the group was. They all drank too much, shared loud stories, danced with one another, and even said some over-the-top goodbyes to people who weren't their spouses. Throughout the night, Tim's mood swung between sadness, happiness, and deep thought. The group tried to keep his spirits up, with each woman taking turns to distract him with light-hearted dancing and conversation. Tim spent the evening enjoying the company of friends. At the end of the night, as everyone said their goodbyes, each of the women gave him a quick kiss, trying to outdo one another. Serena was the last in line and gave him an especially bold farewell, slipping her phone number into his pocket before stepping away, saying, "Call me," with a smile. With the goodbyes finished, the group gathered by their cars, deciding who was sober enough to drive. Wildman, clearly far too drunk, handed Tim his car keys, mumbling, "You drive. I've had way too much, and Laura doesn't like driving at night." Laura looked at Tim, assessing if he was sober enough, and eventually nodded in agreement. Wildman got into the passenger seat without hesitation. Tim opened the back door for Laura, but she insisted on sitting in the front to keep an eye on his driving, speaking in a tone that left no room for debate. They squeezed into the front seat, with Tim taking the driver's seat and Laura in the middle. It was a bit of a tight fit, and Laura had to adjust herself around the gear shift, her dress riding up slightly as she settled in. Tim noticed this, but focused on driving. As Tim started the car, he teased Wildman about how easily he'd fallen asleep after drinking so much. Laura responded with her own jab, reminding Tim that since he had bought some of those drinks, it was only fair that he would be the one to help Wildman inside when they got home. The banter between them was light-hearted, and though there were a few moments of awkwardness due to the close quarters, Laura kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Tim drove carefully, shifting gears as they moved through the dark, winding roads. Though the situation was a bit awkward, it was clear that everyone was ready to call it a night. The silence in the car, with only the soft sound of the engine and the road beneath them, set a calm tone for the ride home. Tim was more than a little tipsy as he drove, and his thoughts were all over the place. Sitting next to him was Laura, his friend Will's wife, someone he should definitely not be thinking about in this way. Still, memories of Will and Laura's open relationship made him curious. Maybe it wasn't such a big deal after all. As he drove, Tim found himself distracted by Laura's presence. He reached out, lightly touching her leg, thinking about how far he could push this. His hand moved higher on her thigh, and though it felt wrong, he excused his actions by reminding himself of what he'd heard about Will and Karen. Laura didn't pull away or say anything, so Tim let his hand linger, testing the waters. The hem of Laura's dress slid up as Tim's hand moved. It felt like everything slowed down when her dress revealed more of her legs. Laura remained quiet, her expression unchanged, but she finally spoke as they neared a stop sign. "Eyes on the road," she said calmly, but she didn't pull her dress down either. Tim quickly focused on driving, but as soon as they were moving again, his hand returned to her leg. They drove in silence for a few more minutes, the tension thick between them, though Laura didn't acknowledge it. When they reached their destination, Tim parked the car and turned off the engine. He looked over at Laura, feeling uncertain but curious. Will was still sound asleep in the back, oblivious to what had been happening. Laura turned toward Tim, meeting his gaze. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked softly. Tim hesitated before answering. "Maybe a little. It seems like you didn't mind either." Laura smiled, though her tone remained light. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I just didn't want you falling asleep at the wheel." Tim wasn't sure what to make of that, but before he could say anything else, Laura added, "You know, I wasn't really trying to mess with you. I was just keeping things interesting." Her comment made Tim wonder what was really going on, but he didn't push it any further. They sat there in silence for a moment longer, the unspoken tension lingering as the night went on. "I could have made you feel worse than that little girl did, but I didn't want you to spend the whole night knowing I was with Will and you couldn't be with me." "It was a nice kiss, Laura, but come on. The kiss that girl gave me was something else. You really think you could have done better?" he murmured close to her ear. Laura leaned in a bit, turning towards him. Tim noticed and felt welcomed. He quickly wrapped his hand around her waist. "You feel nice, but that girl—" "She doesn't have what I have and doesn't know what I know," she replied, pulling him closer. Tim leaned in, kissing her gently. At the same time, he brushed his fingers along her side. She unbuttoned another button on her blouse and pulled him closer again. He sank into the moment, feeling the thrill of connection between them. Laura pulled him closer and kissed him deeply, their lips moving together. She seemed to forget everything else around them in the excitement of it all. Tim was caught up in the warmth of that moment, lost in how good it felt. His thoughts were a mix of excitement and confusion as he realized her husband was right there beside them. He knew it was wrong, yet everything felt so right. What began as harmless flirting had escalated and he felt a strong bond with her. He pulled away slightly, but she quickly sat up, smirking at him. "Okay, Timmy, tell me, how does that kiss compare to your little college girl?" Tim paused, taken aback by her question. Then it clicked. "So you did that just to overshadow Serena?" "Well, that's not the only reason. We owed our spouses after that kiss from Guilty Will. He finally admitted to it after a week," she said as she straightened her clothes. "You're not bad at kissing," she teased with a playful smile. "I always wondered about your reputation. You're decent to look at, but you've never made me feel overwhelmed." "That's not true," Tim responded quietly. "You were definitely enjoying it. I could tell. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But someone had to stay in control." Tim leaned in and kissed her again, more firmly this time. She let out a small sound of approval. As they kissed, Tim's hand gently moved along her leg. She leaned into him for a moment before pulling back slightly. She smiled and said, "You really can't get enough of this, can you? Now let's focus. We need to get my husband inside. That's as far as this goes for now." The next morning, Tim woke up with a pounding headache and a queasy stomach. A couple of aspirin and a big glass of water helped him feel a bit better. His sons were quietly watching cartoons in the living room. Laura was in the kitchen looking fresh and energetic. She had been frustrated the night before since she didn't get to drink, but today she seemed pleased. Tim watched her moving around, preparing breakfast. She wore a light robe and slippers. He walked up behind her, put his hands on her hips, and kissed her neck. "Good morning, beautiful. I really enjoyed that kiss last night. Can I get another one this morning?" he asked with a grin. She blushed slightly but continued working. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, knowing how rough he'd felt the night before. Tim smiled. "It was tough to sleep," he said softly. She turned around and playfully pushed him away, keeping a bit of space between them. He raised his eyebrows and smirked at her open robe, saying, "Nice look, but not as nice as what you're hiding." She gasped, quickly closed her robe, and turned bright red. "Dear, you really can't keep showing off to guests. Someone like Tim might take it the wrong way, especially after the kiss from last night at the beer garden," Will warned as he carefully made his way to the coffee pot to pour himself a cup. Laura felt embarrassed, and Tim thought about how much Will really knew about the kiss. He stepped closer to Laura and held out his cup for a refill. Will smiled and asked, "So, what do you think of my wife? She looks good for being pregnant, right?" Tim joked back, "She looked great from what I just saw, but if you take a nap for a bit, I could give a more detailed opinion, or maybe you could help me out." Turning back to Laura, he encouraged, "Gorgeous. If you would just let that robe open again, or even just take it off, I could give a more thoughtful answer to your husband's question." Laura, cheeks bright red, held her robe tightly and left the room, saying, "You've seen enough. You two can cook your own breakfast since all you do is stare and tease the cook." Will and Tim chuckled as she walked away and quickly went to save the bacon and scrambled eggs from burning. Will took the toast out of the oven and they sat down to eat. Will looked at Tim and asked, "So, what about Serena? Did you two hit it off?" Thinking of Carl's cousin made Tim smile. He said, "Have you ever seen a girl with legs that long?" Will replied, "Maybe I kept getting distracted. Her skirt was so short I couldn't really tell, but they looked long and elegant. I'd need another look when I'm sober to be sure." "Let me ask again. Have you seen a 5'9" girl with longer and lovelier legs?" Tim questioned. Will pretended to think hard and then replied, "Now that you mention it, no. By the way, did she wear flesh-colored clothing or was she just very stylish?" Tim laughed and acted innocent, although the truth was quite straightforward. "Your wife looked stylish too." Will winked and turned towards the hallway, listening to the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. Laura came back with her hair tied back, wearing Daisy Dukes and a halter top. When they whistled, she confidently said, "I know you two will stare at me all day, so I decided to give you something to look at." Will joked, "That outfit is perfect for indoors, but I can't wait to see your reaction when we step outside in the cold." "Don't you think so, Tim?" "That might be tough to handle, but I'm really looking forward to seeing those goosebumps on those beautiful legs," Tim replied with a playful tone. Laura felt her cheeks warm. She dressed this way to feel attractive, especially during her pregnancy, but Tim seemed to be getting too familiar and she felt tempted. "Hey, Will, can I ask you something? Isn't being intimate while pregnant the best ever?" Will laughed and nodded. "Trust me, buddy, it just gets better until around the 8th month," Tim said with excitement. Will rubbed his hands together, looking eager. "If it ever gets overwhelming, just call me and I'll come help," Tim offered. Will assured him he had his number saved and would reach out if things got tough. Laura looked less than impressed. "You aren't suggesting you would share your beloved wife with him, are you?" Will grinned widely. "Well, it wouldn't be the first time we shared, but no, I will not share my wonderful wife even with my best friend." Laura smiled and Will added jokingly, "Unless it becomes too much for me." Tim nodded. "I've got your back, brother, ready to help." Laura pretended to pout but then smiled, playfully slapped them on the shoulders, and said they should stop talking about her feelings. She poured fresh coffee for herself and the guys while thinking about what it would be like to share a moment with them. Before she could sit down, the boys called her from the living room, asking her to change the channel for them. Tim winked. "Daisy, we can't wait to see you come and go, so make it fun." She playfully swayed as she walked through the kitchen door. The men laughed, and Tim told Will he was a lucky guy. Karen found her thoughts wandering while Larry was very eager with no real rhythm. She had flirty moments with him at the New Year's Eve party because she thought Tim was giving too much attention to Larry's wife, Jeannie. Jeannie worked in the high school science department that Tim managed, but they seemed a bit too close. Larry quickly became captivated by her. He rushed to get her drinks and danced with her during every slow song. Jeannie obviously felt jealous, and Tim looked annoyed, but she thought his attention was sweet, and Larry was charming. When Tim complained, she pointed out that he was acting the same way with Jeannie, which quieted him down. She was right. There was something between them. Larry started calling her after she got home from work. Just like before, their conversations quickly became intimate. They began sharing personal fantasies and felt more connected with each other. She enjoyed having this power over him, especially since he had a charming wife who her husband liked. She thought it would be a good idea to invite Larry to the next gathering. Larry saw himself as quite the charmer, but she soon found out that he didn't bring much to their time together. He lacked skill, moved too quickly, and seemed uninterested in ensuring she was happy. The others she had been with, though not perfect, had treated her with care and had appreciated her. Larry didn't seem to understand how to make things enjoyable. While they were together, she wondered how he ended up with someone like Jeannie. Fortunately, he was quick to finish, only lasting about 7 or 8 minutes. After that, she could take something to keep herself engaged and spend time with others. She had been told that her commitments would end once the film was done, allowing her to return to a quieter life as a wife, mother, and teacher. She knew from her past experiences that she might be tempted to wander again, but right now, the idea of living a stable life felt more appealing than it had in a long time. Karen discovered 3 important things about herself. She loved the excitement of attraction, the first time was special, and her interest faded afterward. She felt exhilarated when she first connected with JW, and again with Steve and JW together on the same bed. This led her to think that more could mean more fun, so when Frank asked for a turn at the gathering, she was willing to see if that was true. Being with Frank didn't thrill her much, but with 3 men working together, she finally felt joy. On the way home, JW told her she was in for another exciting experience next time. The surprise was Barry Benton, a successful lawyer and active politician. He was married to a lovely woman but claimed he needed more excitement in his life. He was considerate and tried to make her happy. However, he introduced her to something else that sparked her interest: power. Her first experience with a powerful figure was a senator in Austin. They met in a hotel one afternoon while she was supposed to be at a conference. She felt a rush of excitement being with someone so influential. In truth, he wasn't anything special, but the excitement made it feel important, and she wanted more. Her wish came true when 2 high-ranking officials visited the next day, one in the morning and another in the afternoon. Neither one was impressive, but she made them think they were. She enjoyed the feeling of having a powerful man close to her, and sometimes that was enough to make her feel good, even when the experience wasn't great. On the last day of the event, she had a close interaction with an important man and then spent time with his biggest supporter. As they left, she felt a sense of pride that she had connected with top officials in the state. However, the man that afternoon was particularly unusual, and she told Benton to never ask her to see him again. Her next experience was at another gathering at JW's ranch. There were no officials this time, but Benton and a sheriff had joined, making the group larger. For Karen, the thrill of engaging in multiple encounters had faded. The idea that more would be better was proven wrong that night. After all, she had been with 5 different men without much satisfaction, and she figured the others wouldn't be any better. Now she just felt bored and used, ready for it all to end. Being in the adult entertainment world wasn't as great as it seemed. The only reason she stayed that night were JW's threat to tell Tim what she had been doing, the promise of freedom after finishing the film, and a chance to earn $5,000 from the sales. If she got that money, she would use it for a wonderful family vacation. It would still come from her choices, but it was the best way she could make up for neglecting her husband and kids while chasing after excitement. She had been told that the audience for a specific film would be mostly overseas, and that it wouldn't release in the USA. She somewhat believed it because many films featured more experienced performers, but it still worried her. She decided to finish filming with the other two men quickly so she could go home in time to relax, cuddle up in bed, and enjoy her own company, getting ready for the joy she knew her husband could provide. She recognized her insatiable nature and had come to terms with it, even if she felt it might lead her to trouble one day. Then, her thoughts were interrupted by Larry's remarks about Tim being a weak husband who couldn't take care of his wife, and she responded with anger. Feeling guilty and wanting to get back to her normal life, her anger started to rise, mostly directed at herself, but Larry took the brunt of it. After she sent him running away, she cleaned up, went into the living room to find her clothes, and asked JW to take her home. Leaving now would give her time to clear her mind and prepare herself so Tim wouldn't suspect anything. He never had known, and she planned to keep it that way. She was always careful. They all tried to persuade her to stay, using both friendly talks and strong words, but the only reason she found convincing was JW's promise that filming a specific scene tonight would mean they only had one more short, fully clothed scene left before Beauty and the Beasts was done, and she could be free from her commitments. After having another drink and taking a moment to calm down, she agreed reluctantly. She decided it was best to finish this quickly so she could return to her real life and the love of her husband and sons. Setting up and filming the scene was really challenging. Joe Ward was supposed to be on the bottom, but he was quite large, making it uncomfortable for her. Joe Allen was rather quick, so she had to pretend to keep up with the scene to avoid any issues. Even though she was uneasy about being the focus of Larry's attention, she went along with it because JW and Frank needed the filming to happen. She did warn Larry not to ever mention anything about her role to anyone. Just as they were filming, loud noises startled them, and the lights went out. JW grabbed a flashlight, rushed outside, and yelled about a storm and live wires near their trucks. He hurried back so they could find their clothes in the dim light, and Karen wrapped herself in a quilt to stay warm, knowing it would soon become very cold in the house. While they were discussing how to handle the electrical issues, they heard a loud noise, and the shed outside burst into flames. Panic spread quickly, especially since their trucks were parked nearby. The situation worsened when Benton's truck caught fire, which burned for a few moments before exploding and igniting Frank's truck. With two trucks on fire, JW's truck in front of Frank's and Larry's car parked nearby, fear surrounded them like the flames consuming the vehicles. In just moments, the last truck and the car caught fire, and the flames reached toward the back of the house. This shared fear pushed them to act quickly. They hurriedly grabbed anything they could for shelter and warmth. JW considered going to the bedroom for the cameras and film, but changed his mind when he saw part of the house already burning. Panicking, he rushed back to the living room and led everyone to the boathouse by the lake. They slid down the steep, snowy path, half running and half falling. Upon reaching the boathouse, they quickly looked around. Most of the items there were unhelpful, like tubes and paddles, but they found a propane heater. They stacked boxes, rafts, and other things around the walls for insulation. Then JW lit the propane heater. It didn't warm much in the freezing conditions, but by huddling together and sharing blankets and jackets, they managed to stay somewhat warm. It was still uncomfortable for Karen in her thin dress, but she shivered, clung to those around her, and hoped to see the dawn. As the adrenaline faded, they started to think about their situation. Karen realized she wouldn't be home to check on the babysitter or see her husband. Oh no! How am I going to explain being out all night to Tim? He's going to be so angry. Everyone except JW and Steve shared her worries and began to create a believable story. Most of their ideas were easy to see through, but none of them could sleep. This gave them plenty of time to think and revise their stories. Finally, just before dawn, they came up with one story that Benton believed would hold up, at least against a furious spouse. Since he had agreed to be their attorney and was familiar with their situations, he needed to be pleased with the plan. They questioned each other, practiced and rehearsed until it felt like their story. Karen knew it had many gaps and was not a strong cover at all, but it was the best they could come up with. Maybe their spouses would be so relieved to see them that they wouldn't ask too many questions. That was very unlikely for Tim, Karen thought, but she knew that telling the truth would mean losing everything she cared about, so she felt it was worth the chance. If things went wrong, she could always admit to the truth and ask for a second opportunity. The long night allowed JW to go on and on about the things he lost in the fire. New items, valuable possessions, and cherished family treasures. He was heartbroken over the loss of his things, which seemed to matter more to him than the relationships and jobs that everyone else was trying to save. Steve listened quietly for a long time. Then he said firmly, JW, while you're feeling sorry for yourself, remember that you also lost all the videotapes and recordings you made. What do you think the investors will say when they find out we have nothing? Steve's harsh words caught everyone's attention. JW leaned his head into his hands, feeling sad. The other men started discussing how to recreate the scenes and improve the movie. Karen sat quietly, listening for a few moments before confronting them with what was real. The first thing you need is a new leading lady. I'm out. Without any videotapes or recordings, you don't have anything to hold over me anymore. I was foolish to let you charm me, JW, but I've learned my lesson. When life hits you hard with a storm and a fire in one night, it's a clear sign to rethink your choices. I have, and I won't go back to a path that includes being with you. I'm focusing on what's right for me. You might think about telling my husband what happened. Frank, you might want to threaten my job, but I assure you if you mess with me, the trouble you'll face will be far worse than what happened tonight. I don't know how I got into this situation, but none of you can compare to my husband, so don't come near me again. Half-dressed, tired, and freezing, not one man spoke up against her. It had been fun while it lasted. They all enjoyed her company. But now, she had clearly said she was finished with them. So that was it. None of them wanted the issues she could cause if she involved her husband and the authorities. Besides, they had other options for her role, including some enthusiastic college girls and a couple of other mothers. After the storm, they would still have to deal with the cold reality of explaining why they had been out all night during a winter storm, leaving their families alone and vulnerable, not to mention the burned vehicles in JW's house. As dawn broke, another wave of trouble awaited the group hiding out in the boat shed at the Rogers Ranch. Daylight didn't mean they were safe or that they would soon go home to their families, but it did mean they were closer to being safe. And that much closer to having to tell their unbelievable story to their worried loved ones. On a late Saturday afternoon, an Army helicopter from Fort Hood was searching for people trapped in vehicles when it spotted a burned house and shed, along with some people waving near the lake. A rescue team from law enforcement, along with an ambulance, was sent to make sure the fire survivors were okay. They found that all were suffering from cold and dehydration, but one woman was in the worst condition because of the light dress she wore. Everyone was taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. The others received care for frostbite and dehydration, but Karen had to stay overnight for further checks. The doctor who saw her noted something troubling and asked a nurse to check if she had been harmed and to take some samples regardless of what she said. Karen said she hadn't been harmed but agreed to be cleaned up. The nurse quietly took the samples and cleaned her, knowing that something had happened, either by force or willingly with others. With phone service and electricity still limited, Karen could only lie in her hospital bed, hoping her family was safe, that her marriage was okay, and let her tears flow. When Karen was released early Sunday morning, a police officer came to give her a ride home. She wore borrowed hospital scrubs and a light jacket, and since it was very cold, the officer turned the heater on high during the drive. Despite her situation, the officer noticed her beauty and how even loose clothes looked good on her. When they reached her house, the young officer helped check if anyone was home. Finding no one, he made sure she would be warm by building a big fire in the fireplace. Just before he had to leave for another call, he asked if she was okay and reassured her that he didn't know where her husband was or how to reach him. He informed her that phone service should be back by tomorrow at the latest, and that electricity might be restored later that day. After he left, she found a note on the kitchen table. She read it, and tears filled her eyes. Karen, if you are interested, the boys and I are fine. I have taken them to stay with some relatives who have electricity. There are many things I need to ask you, but let's start with these. Where were you? Who were you with? How long has this been happening? Why? If you are back, meet me at Andy Robbins's office when school ends on Monday. Be ready to tell me the truth. You will only have one chance. Since I will be with my family, You should bring your lawyer. Tim. The tone of the message made it clear that he knew. Panic filled Karen. How could he have found out? She worried that Sharon, who almost idolized him, might have mentioned the nights she babysat, and being the cleverest person she knew, he could easily put the pieces together. If so, it was up to her to change his mind using her charm, his love for her, and his love for the kids to make him believe the stories she and her friends had made up. She could not lose her husband and family because she desired something new. She told herself that from this mistake, she had learned she truly loved her husband, that he was the only man who could fulfill her in every way. It may have been the wrong path to understanding, but now she knew. From this day forward, she would be the best wife and mother she could be for the rest of her life. With that thought keeping her calm, she sat by the fire, wrapped in the cozy quilt they liked to use while watching TV, and practiced the story she would tell to ease his worries and bring him and their sons back home. Jimmy read the report about the rescue of Karen and the 7 men when he arrived for duty. He knew this news would confirm Tim's concerns, but he had promised to inform him. Andy Robbins looked worried and shook his head in disappointment as he shared details of the rescue but asked no questions. Jimmy explained to the lawyer about the health issues that caused Karen to stay overnight in the hospital and that she was now home recovering. He let Andy know that emergency responders expected electric and phone service to return soon. He asked if someone would check on Karen or if the police should add her to their list of people to visit. Andy said it was only a few blocks away, so he would check on her regularly until power was back on. After Jimmy left, Andy put on his winter gear and carefully made his way to the Kelly home. The joy on Karen's face when she opened the door faded to worry when she saw Andy. She invited him inside, moved 2 chairs near the fireplace, and asked him to sit and talk with her. Karen was glad she had changed into nice but modest jeans and a sweater, hoping that Tim would come home when he found out she was there. Andy was Tim's good friend, but she had noticed the way he looked at her when he thought no one was paying attention. She planned to use his feelings to get information. Sitting nicely but close enough for him to notice her, she moved her chair nearer to the fire. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume. With a worried yet innocent expression, she asked Andy where Tim and the guys were and how she could talk to him. He replied that he didn't know, but Tim would call when the phone was working again. Karen's disappointment was clear, but she quickly smiled and said how happy she would be to see her sons and husband again. The look Andy gave her made her frown a bit. She said, "Andy, I know you have questions, just like Tim does. I won't tell the whole story until I'm with my husband, but I promise it's not what it seems." "Karen," Andy said gently, "the officer told me about you being stuck overnight, the house and cars on fire. That explains why you didn't come home, but why did you leave your kids with a babysitter to go off with 2 coaches Tim doesn't trust for a trip that didn't even happen?" Karen's heart raced, but she stayed calm. She answered honestly, "Andy, we really were going to watch the game. It was important for the team's chances. When we stopped at a store, everyone was talking about the weather and how many games had been canceled, so we decided to come back. We stopped at JW's ranch along the way so he could check on his pipes. Some of his friends were there. We talked and had a few drinks. We were about to leave when the storm hit. You know what happened next, but you don't know that I thought I might not make it. I prayed over and over to survive so I could hug my husband and sons again and tell them how much I love them. There's more to the story, but I want to share it with Tim first. Do you know how I can reach him? I need to find them." Dan felt sympathy for her, but 2 things kept him from falling for her charm. Tim was his client and friend, and he sensed that she wasn't being truthful, although she looked so sweet. She was a skilled actress and a convincing storyteller, and she presented her tale well. Karen clearly chose to fabricate a story instead of admitting the truth and seeking forgiveness. Tim had witnessed the events, and his refusal to believe any more lies would be a problem for her if she persisted. He warned her, "Karen, that's a believable story, but I must remind you that any chance of making up with Tim relies on you telling him the truth, completely and honestly. I don't know how much he understands or how much he thinks, but your version does not match what he believes happened, and Tim is not easily fooled." Karen felt worried by Andy's warning, but she remained outwardly confident that everyone would forgive her once they knew her version of the truth. Andy, I'm not sure what Tim believes happened, but we know he has a quick temper and can jump to conclusions when he's upset. I'm certain that when he hears the truth, everything will be okay. Andy looked at her with pity. He got up and said he would check in on her in a few hours to see how she was doing. After receiving a kiss on his cheek and a whispered, "Thank you for being our friend," he left. As he drove home, Karen's scent and the touch of her lips lingered warmly on his cheek. After Andy left, Karen changed her clothes and walked through the chilly house, wearing a heavy coat over her sweatpants. Some of the boys' toys and winter clothes were missing. Tim had taken his toiletries and some of his school clothes, indicating he might come back since nothing else was gone. Returning to the warm living room, she added 2 more logs to the fire and lay down on the couch. She felt completely drained from the events of Friday night, not having slept well and worrying all day. There had been excitement in finally being rescued on Saturday and returning home today. She wrapped herself in quilts, enjoying the cozy comfort of her home, which was still lovely despite lacking electricity. Someone had filled several pitchers and 2 large jugs with water, allowing her to drink freely and even flush the toilet when needed. She appreciated the little things, thinking how nice they were. As she relaxed, she drifted off to sleep. Her first dream took a dark turn, waking her in distress. It began happily. She was sitting at a table with her husband and 5 other men. The men took turns bringing her drinks and enjoying light-hearted moments with her. While dancing, they found ways to brush against her, which felt uncomfortable and unsettling. The woman felt conflicted, enjoying the attention but deeply worried about how Tim was handling the situation. She asked him why he wasn't stepping in, and he responded that it was her life and her choices, which made her frustrated. Wanting to provoke a reaction, she began acting more boldly with the others. Eventually, one of the men led her back to the table, but instead of sitting her down, he lifted her onto the surface. He stood close to her, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her passionately. Her husband watched the scene but did nothing since she wasn't resisting. As the man became more forward, a tense atmosphere built around them. Despite the situation escalating, her husband chose to leave rather than intervene. The event took a toll on her, and when she was alone, she felt a deep sense of confusion and fear. She woke up drenched in sweat, shaking, and overwhelmed with sorrow. She cried until the terrifying images in her mind started to fade. She realized it was just a bad dream, but she worried that if Tim knew what she had done, he would look at her the same way he did in her dream. He would turn away and leave her behind, just like in her nightmare. After she cried for a while, she gently fell back asleep and managed to avoid any more bad dreams. A soft afternoon light filled the room when she woke up an hour later to a knock at the door. Still feeling sleepy and a bit mixed up, she hurried to the door. When she opened it, she found Andy standing there with a big thermos and a sandwich wrapped in silver foil. "I brought you a ham, egg, and cheese sandwich and some coffee," he said. "How was your nap?" Karen knew she probably looked a mess. She hadn't even brushed her hair before answering the door and had slept in her clothes. "Thank you, Andy. Can I wash up first and then join you for coffee and food?" He grinned at her and tilted his head, saying, "Why, you look great to me." She laughed and quickly went to the bathroom. The mirror showed her she was far from looking great, so she set to work to freshen up. Once her hair was tidy, she put on a little makeup and changed into a nice sweatsuit. She went back to the living room. Andy was adding logs to the fireplace, and when he turned to see her, his expression showed he liked how she looked. He offered her a cup of coffee with cream and sweetener, just how she liked it. She thanked him and eagerly enjoyed the sandwich. "I'm sorry for eating so quickly, but I was really hungry. I don't remember the last time I ate. Thank you for being so thoughtful." Andy was trying hard not to stare at her beauty, and he focused on not letting himself be too taken in. He looked away, poured them more coffee, and reminded her he had promised the police to check on her now and then, especially after everything she had been through and with the power outage. She looked at him with appreciation and said softly, "No matter your reasons, I truly thank you. You've been a wonderful friend since we moved here, and I wish we could spend time together more often." Being divorced and without kids makes it hard for me to feel like part of the group. You all didn't push me away. I stepped back. I've been busy searching for my wife and kids and wondering what I might have done wrong. I haven't been the best company lately, and I didn't want to bring my troubles around you all. Don't feel bad about me not joining in more. It was my choice that led to my absence, not anyone else's. Karen realized that her decisions might lead to her being left out. She needed to convince Tim and Andy that her missing Friday night was just a matter of bad luck and that nothing wrong had happened. She worried that their sharp minds would see through her story, which she had created under pressure with the less thoughtful guys at the boathouse. She thought it would help to have an ally when she faced them, and she remembered that Andy had always shown interest in her. Maybe, just maybe, she could win him over. "Andy," she said gently, "it's getting warm in here with the big fire and the sun shining through. This fleece is a bit too much. Do you mind if I change into something more comfortable?" He said it was fine, so she quickly went down the hall to her closet. She wanted to look nice, but not obvious. What should she wear? She decided on a comfortable outfit. No bra, red underwear, a hoodie, and loose shorts. The white pullover would show off her figure nicely, and when she sat, the shorts fit well, highlighting her slender legs. After checking her reflection and darkening her lipstick a bit, she felt she had found the right balance. Attractive, but not too much. When she returned, Andy was by the sliding glass doors, looking outside at the melting snow. His expression showed he agreed with her look. She moved an old love seat closer to the fire, sat down, and invited him to join her, which he did. She angled her legs toward him, her knee just brushing against his. She began talking excitedly about how much stronger the winter storm had been than expected and how it caught many people off guard. Andy seemed a bit unsure about their closeness and the direction of the conversation, so she changed subjects and asked when the basketball team would play their postponed game. Andy explained that they wouldn't be playing because the top team had already played and won, so there were no playoff stakes, and it would be tough to find referees for a sudden game. "Oh, I really wanted to see them play again. His team has improved so much this year. They really give their all, and he coaches them wonderfully. Everyone loves him, you know? He's been named Teacher of the 6 weeks several times and even Teacher of the Year in our first year here," she said proudly. In her excitement, Karen innocently moved her knee closer to Andy's leg and placed her hand on his arm as she continued praising her husband. Andy looked a bit uncomfortable but didn't pull away. "Now, Andy, let's talk about you. How are you doing? I know you're trying to move on from the divorce and focus on getting your kids back, but I sense there's still sadness in you, Andy." "Are you really okay?" Karen asked gently, placing a comforting hand on his leg, letting it rest there. Andy didn't move her hand away. With a heavy sigh and sorrow in his eyes, Andy replied, "I'm managing as best as I can, Karen. Catching them in the act hurt deeply, and the divorce was rough. Losing my kids was the hardest part. If I could go back, I'd do things differently. Maybe I could have stopped it, or at least given it a real chance. But I didn't, and I regret not letting her explain. Now I find myself lost, focused only on trying to find my ex-wife and kids, with nothing else really mattering in my life." Karen, feeling his pain, placed her hand gently on his arm and rested her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Andy, I'm so sorry," she whispered softly, squeezing his hand to offer comfort. The two sat in a moment of quiet understanding. Andy felt her warmth and closeness, but his mind remained weighed down by his past and the mistakes he believed he made. Karen looked at him, her eyes filled with sympathy, silently offering him comfort through her presence. He leaned in and kissed her gently, finding a small moment of peace in her support. Karen returned the kiss softly, wanting to help ease the pain she could sense in him. It was a tender, quiet moment, full of unspoken emotions. They sat there together, quietly sharing a simple connection in the midst of Andy's sorrow. Karen and Andy sat together, enjoying each other's company when they found themselves sharing an intimate moment. As their feelings deepened, Karen flirted playfully, and they shared a few tender kisses. Andy, however, soon realized that things were getting a little too intense. Feeling the need to step back, he gently pulled away, saying he had to leave. Karen, trying to keep things lighthearted, gave him a friendly smile and playfully asked him to stay a little longer. But Andy, feeling conflicted, insisted it was time to go and quickly made his way out the door. Left alone, Karen sighed and composed herself, returning to her daily routine. She took a moment to relax in the quiet room, gathering her thoughts. After a while, she got up and went about her day, leaving the encounter behind her as just another fleeting moment. The scene passed quietly, and Karen moved on with a sense of peace. The brief encounter was now just a memory, and she was ready to focus on what came next in her life. She lay on the couch, deep in thought about her relationship with Tim. She wished they could have fun like they used to, but lately, things had changed. It felt like their roles had reversed. In the beginning, Tim was the adventurous one, always full of energy and ideas. He had experienced so much before they met, while she was still figuring things out. Now, she was eager to explore and connect more deeply, but he seemed hesitant. As she remembered their early days, a smile touched her lips. There was something special about how Tim had broken down her walls. She had planned to take things slow, but each time he held her, all her plans melted away. His presence made her feel safe, and she couldn't help but be drawn to him. On their third date, things moved forward in a way that surprised her. They shared moments of closeness, and despite her nerves, she found herself trusting him more with each touch. By their fourth date, they were growing closer, and she began to let go of the reservations that had once held her back. On their fifth date, Tim invited her for a weekend getaway. They had dinner, danced, and shared soft moments together. It felt natural, like they were building something special. When they finally went up to the room, Tim was gentle, making her feel cared for. His touch was soft, and every moment with him made her feel more connected. He seemed to know her in ways she didn't even know herself, and for the first time, she realized how much she had been holding back. It was a moment of clarity for her, understanding that it wasn't about rushing, but about truly being present with someone she trusted. Looking back, she realized how much she had grown since then, and how much more she wanted to share with Tim. She longed for them to rediscover the connection they once had, hoping they could move forward together. She had always believed in saving herself for marriage, but after her wedding night, she found herself questioning that choice. Instead of pride, she felt a strange regret for not having explored relationships more in the past. The happiness and excitement she felt with her husband were beyond anything she had ever imagined, and she found herself constantly drawn to him. The guilt from her upbringing and the pressure to wait until marriage faded as her experiences with him grew. Even moments of doubt couldn't stop her from looking forward to their time together. As the relationship progressed, she sometimes wondered about the other men who had once shown interest in her, but she knew deep down that she and Tim were meant to be. They soon got engaged, married, and had 2 children. During her pregnancies, her emotions were all over the place, and her desire to be close to Tim grew stronger, though the physical changes eventually made it difficult for her. Despite everything, her body quickly returned to its previous state after childbirth, though she noticed some changes. After 4 years of marriage, her desire to be close to Tim hadn't diminished. She was often the one to initiate intimate moments, and even though they spent a lot of time together, she sometimes found herself wanting more. Unfortunately, these feelings led her to consider new experiences with others. She caught herself thinking about how different it would be with someone else. Her curiosity grew, and she started to imagine the excitement of drawing someone in and the thrill of the unknown. The first time she acted on these thoughts, it was a whirlwind of emotions. She had gone out dancing with Tim and some friends when she ended up talking to 2 men who were paying her a lot of attention. They complimented her and made her feel desirable. Caught up in the moment, she left the party for a while, feeling a rush of excitement and recklessness. Later that night, overwhelmed by everything, she found herself in a situation she hadn't planned. The experience was new, confusing, and full of mixed emotions. She quickly realized how far things had gone and was left with a lot to think about. Karen didn't enjoy her time with the 2 men as much as she hoped. Feeling unfulfilled, she excused herself to the restroom to take a moment alone and calm herself down. After freshening up, she returned to the table, only to be met with questioning stares. She brushed off their concerns, explaining that she felt a bit unwell from the food and drinks. While some of the men seemed to accept her story with understanding, the women weren't so easily convinced, casting cold, skeptical glances her way. Despite the tension, Karen felt a sense of relief. She had gotten away with bending the rules, and the thrill of secrecy was what really excited her. Though her earlier experience didn't live up to her expectations, the excitement of stepping out of line was something she couldn't shake off. The desire to test boundaries again grew stronger inside her. She noticed that the women were becoming more suspicious, but they were also getting more relaxed with their drinks. Karen, on the other hand, paced herself, playing along with her husband and letting the night flow. The group was having fun, and there was a lot of playful energy in the air. Karen, however, was careful, keeping an eye on her moment. As the night wore on, Tim's best friend, Will, along with his two brothers, seemed particularly interested in Karen. She could tell from the way they lingered near her. While they danced together in the dim lights, their actions hinted at their intentions. Karen flirted back, subtly encouraging them while whispering softly to keep the playful mood going. At one point, Karen found herself alone with Will when his wife and a few others headed to the restroom. He quickly led her outside, where he kissed her with intensity. Before things could escalate, though, a couple of people stepped outside for a smoke, unknowingly interrupting them. The moment was broken, and Karen found herself quickly pulling back from what could have gone further. The interruption saved her from making a decision she might have regretted, though the excitement still lingered. Later, Karen found herself drawn into another risky situation. She flirted with one of the younger coaches she knew from a previous school district, and eventually got involved in an affair with an old flame, now married. The relationship quickly became complicated and nearly cost them both their marriages. They were almost caught when a family member stumbled upon them during one of their secret meetings, but they managed to cover up the situation just in time. Through all these close calls, Karen's thrill-seeking behavior never quite let up, and she continued to test the limits of what she could get away with. She thought she might get caught, but luckily, no one came to check the truck. For her, the thrill of almost being discovered added an exciting edge to their relationship, but it scared him. After that, he decided to distance himself from her. JW liked to brag about how he charmed her, and Steve was proud of how they managed to involve her with the others. The truth was, she probably would have been interested in them on her own. Despite her wandering eyes and meeting new people, she still felt her husband was the best. Even though she had been with several men after getting married, he stood out among them. Tim had a way of impressing her, both with his looks and strength, but even his efforts could only satisfy her for a while. She often found herself relying on other ways to fill the empty spaces in her life, despite the time she spent with her husband and others. She had a routine balancing her life between her husband and other encounters, but she always found herself seeking more, never fully content. "I'm always wanting more, aren't I?" she whispered to herself as she tried to calm the restless feelings she had inside. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.